Welcome everybody to our second official comp plan committee, the CPC meeting here, October 19th, 2022. Thanks for those in attendance. I know a few other people are going to come a little later, but we're here this evening to hear from our consultants, StreetSense. So I'm going to have Sarah Yackel from BFJ introduce them in a moment. But again, tonight, the purpose of this evening's meeting is really to focus on our recent retail study that was conducted, and really have a robust discussion, hopefully, about kind of the state of retail currently in the city. And of course, StreetSense is going to inform us of potential draft recommendations that we would like to incorporate into the plan. And we'll like to hear from you about those issues. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sarah if you want to talk about the agenda.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Thanks for finding time to be with us tonight. I think it's going to be a really interesting presentation. I'm excited that Larissa's here, and I'll introduce her in one moment. So just a quick, reintroductions for those of you. I think I've met all of you. I'm Sarah Yackel, principal at BFJ Planning. Mark Frecker from our office, project manager, is in the back there. We're kind of a pared down team tonight, and we've got Larissa here, Larissa Ortiz from StreetSense. I'll introduce her in one moment. But the main reason we're here tonight is really to hear from Larissa and the hard work that Larissa and her team have done looking at the retail environment, not just in downtown, but in all of the commercial centers and nodes in the city. They've done a really robust and comprehensive assessment and have some interesting, takeaways from their expertise, as well as some interesting recommendations or initiatives, as we're calling them, to discuss with all of you and kind of hear your input. I'm going to just, by way of introduction, Larissa is a principal? Managing director at StreetSense. I've known Larissa for a long time when she was head of her own company, Larissa Ortiz Associates. StreetSense is a real estate and design firm that specializes in mixed-use environments. Larissa's specialty is really retail. I'd say at this point she's probably one of the country's leading experts in retail environments. I'm gonna plug you here, Larissa. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it to her to kind of go through the findings of their analysis, and then I think when you're done, Larissa, it's best to come over to the other side, and we can just have an informal, more casual discussion rather than sort of a teacher-student environment.
Okay. Do 200 Hamilton Avenue. Did they do the White Plains?
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was a very generous introduction. I'll try to live up to that. I'm really pleased to be here. I will say I just finished a 7-year stint as a city planning commissioner for the city of New York, so I'm usually on that side as well, listening to presentations, so it's sometimes nice to be on both sides. But thank you so much. So we are here today to talk about our assessment of the sort of downtown and the mixed-use retail environments throughout White Plains. Our work is, we conducted a market analysis. You probably have seen market analysis before, but we believe that retail environments are successful when a lot of things go right. When the physical environment is comfortable for visitors and accessible. When the business environment and the tenant mix reflects consumers and what they want and need. When there's market demand for those things. When there's capacity and stewardship to manage and improve a district. And ultimately, those things together reflect what the analysis that we've done and the recommendations we made. So, our approach, as I said, is sort of very comprehensive, and we look at, a whole host of elements, and that's what we'll be walking you through today, our assessment as we walk through, physical environment assessment, your market, your capacity, the people who get things done, the organizations that are here to support your retail environments and the business environment. So starting first with the physical assessment, just to set the stage, there are 9 commercial districts that we looked at throughout this exercise. The largest are Mamaroneck Avenue and downtown. They're the largest in size, scale, and their impact in the city. And additionally, as you know, both North White Plains and downtown include regional train stations. Our work really begins with an assessment of what these places want to be, what they're classified as. And we have developed we've modified the International Council of Shopping Centers classification of commercial districts. As you see here, I know you have the papers in front of you, so that might be helpful to be on this slide. But, you know, there are differences between the needs and the kinds of investments you want to make when a place is very convenience in nature versus when it's a destination and it's pulling people from all over the region. The kind of competitiveness that you have to anticipate is different. The kinds of access that you have to provide are different. So, you know, we really believe this classification is important as we look at your districts. And so that's the first thing that we did. So when we looked at downtown White Plains and we classified downtown White Plains, what's interesting, it's got two districts sort of nestled in one. One is really super regional. This is your comparison shopping. These are your you know, destination shopping malls, the Westchester, the Galleria City Center. Together they collectively offer about 1.7 million square feet of retail, and they serve the region. At the same time, you have a community serving sector of your downtown environment, and that is really Mamaroneck Avenue, anchored by food and beverage, serving local needs, serving your daytime employees and office workers, and you know, much of that, you know, you see the differences in terms of the kind of retail and offerings of both, and they sort of exist simultaneously. When we look at your commercial district classification across all of your districts, you know, we begin to see that, you know, they sort of fall, your core downtown areas, as we said, are clearly super regional in nature, you know, are community serving, and to some extent, West Post Road, which is a little bit in your core downtown, is much more neighborhood serving. It's much, you know, focused on an even smaller subsector of your customer base. And then, you know, just to note that Kensico, North White Plains, Gedney, and Rosedale are even smaller than that, are strip convenience. They offer, their trade area is really quite small. They're offering neighborhood goods and services. These are the places where folks from White Plains go for everyday, you know, niche goods and services. I mean, you have a deli or Dunkin' Donuts, you know, these are the kinds of things that you go to more regularly for your coffee, et cetera. With the exception of Central Avenue, which is, you know, an auto-oriented corridor, much more a power center. And I will say we'd not focus on Central Avenue. That was not the focus of our exercise. We did end up focusing on downtown. So, you know, as we look at the physical environment, we always like to understand how you compare to your peers. Are you a world-class, you know, are you competitive when you're looking at your peers? And I use the term world-class, you know, loosely. You know, when we look at your walk score, for instance, and we compare you to some of your peers, I think you're doing very well. You generally are scoring better than nearly every one of your peers, but for, I don't know if I'm supposed to say New Rochelle, but.
We're all friends.
Okay, but for New Rochelle. And actually, we're doing the New Rochelle downtown retail strategy right now as well. When you look at your transit score, you know, I think the fact that you are, you know, in line with your peers and on the better side doesn't mean that these are not things that you want to improve, right? We want you to be world-class sort of in all of these, but you are sort of commensurate with your peers when it comes to transit. And when it comes to your bike score, and I'm focused on downtown here, you know, again, you're bested by New Rochelle, both New Rochelle and downtown. You're bested by Stanford, and I think those are sort of your two most significant competitors in the market. We also looked at traffic counts. So one of the things that we noted, of course, is that one-way street networks and the street networks you have here, the purpose of those networks is to move cars at volume, at scale, and at speed. What that results in are environments that aren't necessarily the most comfortable for for businesses to locate because drivers are driving by, they're not stopping. They're not necessarily the most comfortable for pedestrians to walk along. And so, you know, you end up on these, you know, high volume streets that don't necessarily lend themselves to retail activity, or the places where tenants, when they have options, and they do have options in this market, this is a competitive market, where tenants want to go. So, we want to acknowledge, we know that there's, there are elements coming that address sort of some of the arterials, but that these busy streets and these high-volume streets aren't necessarily creating an environment in which businesses survive and thrive. Your bike networks and your connectivity, we also noted that, while downtown is really very pedestrian-friendly, it can be challenging to navigate by bike, which is an increasingly viable, alternative means of transportation. When you think about people who are investing in e-bikes and e-mobility, which is growing and which people love in these kinds of environments, the safe passageways and networks become really important. I won't belabor this, but the downtown parking, you have 10,534 parking spots and 17 parking facilities throughout downtown. We will leave this for the parking experts, but generally when we see those figures, we noted, and it did not come up in our stakeholder interviews, that this was a significant concern in terms of the amount of parking. But what we did note was when we looked at the parking requirements for activity, what you have are really quite high parking requirements for retail, and in particular for restaurants. And what we share here is a chart that compares downtown White Plains with, again, some of your competitors in the market. And you can see that your minimum parking requirement for retail in downtown is between 3 and 3.3 per thousand, which is a little bit higher than some of your competitors like New Rochelle, less than Mount Vernon. And then when you look at, I think what stands out for us in particular are parking requirements for restaurants, where you have a requirement of 13.3 spaces per 1,000 square feet, which far exceeds what any of your competitors are requiring. So that's one of the challenges that you have when businesses look and think about some of your properties in particular that don't have parking associated with them. And just for reference, so in our experience, downtown environments where you have low car ownership, where there's robust transit, mixed use, which is what you are in your downtown, we generally see less than 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet being the ratio that's comfortable in a mixed-use environment. Keep in mind, you're requiring 13.3. That is greater than really even the Institute of Transportation Engineers recommends. So we did want to point that out, and something that we think is useful to correct through, through your comp plan. And you can see here for comparison, B6 is the Galleria. The requirements are 3 per 1,000 there. You can see and how this compares to ITE is the Institute of Transportation Engineers, some of the requirements there. They recommend retail at 2.65 per 1,000. Again, your retail requirements are higher than even the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which is actually a very conservative organization. Transit options, wonderful transit access, particularly at the Trans Center. You do have your Metro North Station, which is where I came in today, and I walked downtown. I wanted to point out one of the things we note is if everybody's coming there and we want them to come downtown, what's the walk feel like? Is it comfortable? And as we walk through this exercise, we note, very large streets, difficult to cross, uncomfortable to cross, areas of inactivity. There's some, fixes that we can make that will help achieve the kind of environment that you're looking for, especially as people are getting off the train and perhaps living in downtown and walking to downtown. And then once you get downtown, the pedestrian environment really improves drastically, from one block to the next. Great infrastructure, and we do this thing where we grade your streets, and we have developed a grading system. So we've graded your public realm, the streets, the sidewalks, as A. And when we talk about your private realm, what I mean by that are the buildings, the properties that are owned by private entities. And, we noted that there are elements and places where we have significant, blank facades. And so, we gave your private realm a B-. When we go to Mamaroneck Avenue, and I want to spend some time on this, we noticed things like the need for, you've got pedestrian lighting, you've got wide sidewalks, you've got street trees, which are all really nice qualities. Some things that we saw that were missing, dedicated drop-off, for instance, for rideshare. You have a lot of food and beverage tenants, for instance, and the likelihood that, folks are enjoying a drink, enjoying a meal, and might want to take rideshare home is high. So, we noted some opportunities to address that through what you do at the curb. We thought the public realm here was generally pretty good, B+ in both cases. But a few things to note. These are very long blocks, 400 linear feet. When you are a pedestrian, and the science, we look into the science, 50 feet of nothing for a pedestrian generally causes them to turn around. In retail, you don't want more than 50 feet of gap. And when you have to walk, pretend you're mid-block, and you have to, and say you're an older person or you're with your kids, and you want to get across the street, you have to walk 200 feet, you have to cross, and then you have to go back 200 feet. You have created a distance that, through mid-block crossings or through other interventions, you've made the distance longer. And if we could create intervention and improve these distances, you will note that the two sides of the street will work better together, and that effectively we're creating an environment that's more comfortable, and that the businesses are co-located and benefit from being close to one another. So I think that's one thing that we have noted. So you're unintentionally discouraging cross-shopping. Imagine if you were at a mall and it took you, 400 linear feet to go to a store that was right across the way. We want to design environments that make it easier to cross-shop, not more difficult. Another thing that we found really interesting is that the facades really lack texture also, and are relatively flat. The example that we share here of blade signs, that's the one building, it's the Fogo de Chao building right off Main, where we saw blade signs. Other than that, we didn't see them, and these are wonderful tools to encourage exploration of retail environments that you have not been to. And I will challenge you to point out one mall, one Class A shopping environment where they do not have blade signs. This is the lowest hanging fruit in a shopping environment, because what you want to do is give shoppers breadcrumbs so that when they go to a place, they see, they have interest in exploring, and that distance is shortened by the fact that they can anticipate there is something there. Along Westchester Avenue, there are this is one street where it's not particularly pedestrian friendly. They're, primarily designed for the automobile. Not many crosswalks. The sidewalks are not consistent. So, the grade that we gave here to both the public and private realm was a little lower, C+ and C. North White Plains, there are lots of elements that we liked. I think, it is primarily residential. There are some existing businesses. Generally it's like a patchwork, so, a lower grade here. And then Central Avenue, very automobile oriented, very challenging to fix environments that are automobile oriented like that. And as I said, we have focused on downtown, but, this environment, the public realm, the length of and the distance that you have to walk, and creates the lower grade here, so C+ and B- for public and private realm. And then Gedney, really intimate, district, wonderful shopping, not shopping, wonderful restaurant, access to the Greenway, which is very interesting because when we talk to, the owner here and we discuss sort of where customers are coming from. They mentioned that this level of accessibility in the Greenway is actually increasing the number of customers who are coming to that district. So, it reinforces the point that access and comfort getting to and from a place are so key to creating accessible environments, which is why often our recommendations begin to trip into transportation and access. And then Rosedale, also really a very small, convenience-oriented district with, one real set of offerings, but we acknowledge there are real challenges with this intersection that you see here and some vacancies. So, in taking some of the takeaways from the physical environment, we need improvements to alternative transportation infrastructure. You have opportunities to improve walkability, bikeability, accessibility, which we know are really critical to increasing the number of visitors in a shopping district and in a retail district. Those high volume streets we talked about into and out of downtown are not particularly conducive to street level retail. We know that connectivity matters. I made the point that Gedney and the Greenway really have been helpful and have increased patronage to that district. And then signage. The lack of retail signage is particularly notable, and there's no reason why we can't address that issue. We work in environments all the time, downtown environments with cities where we see this kind of signage. And city officials are comfortable approving this kind of signage, and so there's no reason we can't do that here. I want to move to the business environment. So just by way of introduction of what we'll be talking about next, I'm going to start talking in a little bit of code. So I want you to know what our code is. When we talk about retail mix, we're talking about, we split it up into 3 sectors. One are neighborhood goods and services. So the kinds of things like your convenience things, the things your grocery store, your deli, your laundromat, the things that you might do on a Saturday, the things that you do on a frequent basis. Food and beverage. Different from neighborhood goods and services, these are the restaurants, these are the dining establishments that you go to. And then the third is general apparel, furnishings, and other, and I will start saying GAFO in a minute, which really refers to the clothing that you buy, clothing, apparel, shoes, the comparison shopping that you often do when you are in a mall, for instance. So your malls often have a lot of GAFO. Your downtown environments like Mamaroneck Avenue have a lot more food and beverage, for instance, and we'll begin talking about that. So when we look at how this is distributed throughout, we sort of begin to see really strong GAFO on Central Avenue, not a surprise, in downtown and Mamaroneck in part because this is a destination, you have major malls. And then strong food and beverage also in downtown. So we have a little bit of both and along Westchester Avenue. So, these districts are functioning for different purposes. So now moving on to our retail market analysis, and just to go over our approach really quickly, what we have done is, we start by really understanding your retail competition. We try to understand where visitors are coming from, and so we draw trade areas that take into account existing competition, how customers are behaving, and other boundaries like the Hudson River, for instance. And you'll see how we draw your trade areas in a minute. And then we make certain assumptions about the number of customers that we think you can capture from those trade areas. And we calculate how much those residents are spending, and then we make certain assumptions and translate that into how much retail you can support in your downtown. And we turn that into a supply and demand analysis. So we project that retail demand, we compare it to your existing supply of retail, so we did an inventory of all your retail, and we figure out whether you're over or undersupplied. So that's the exercise we're going to go through right now. So we drew 3 trade areas, a primary trade area, which is much more convenience in nature and again, focused on downtown. So this is really covering about a 20-minute walk from downtown. I guess it depends on how old you are, how far that takes you. A secondary trade area, which covers about a 10-minute drive from downtown. And then a tertiary trade area, which is much more destination-driven. And these are what your malls are pulling from, and the assumptions that they make, that people will drive about 25 minutes. So whenever I talk about trade areas from here on out, you'll know sort of where we're pulling the data and the geographies we're pulling them from. So, your median household income here between your primary, which is the first column, primary trade area, secondary trade area, and tertiary trade area. You can see the last column compares you to the U.S. average. Your median household income in all three trade areas is above your national average. When we look at your primary trade area, generally we're seeing households with fewer children. We're seeing less than half of the households are families as well, so much more sort of single, $91,000 income, $92,000 median household income, less than your secondary trade area. When we move to your secondary trade area, this is Westchester after all, much higher incomes, we see the incomes increase significantly. And then what's interesting is in your tertiary trade area, we see those incomes fall, but we see increasingly and incrementally more families. So as you move further out, we have more families, and as you move further in, more singles. When we start looking at your customer base, we pull data. These are called tapestry segments, I don't make these terms up. The names that they give to the segments of your population are sort of a short way to refer to some of this lifestyle and demographics associated with that group. So if we're going to read this, so 21.3% of your customers in White Plains are in this group called diverse convergence. These are folks who are generally foreign-born, Spanish-speaking, relatively young, median age of 33, tend to live in rental apartments. Your next tier is top tier. 17.4% of your residents fall into that tapestry segment. Much higher incomes, $173,000, which is 3 times the average U.S. Of the U.S. household. Highly educated married couples generally with children, without children or older children. And then the balance is much younger. So these younger urban folks fall into trendsetters and laptops and lattes. I love these terms; they're sort of fun. Young, educated urban singles on the move, and then finally city lights, which is also very diverse and lower average income. So moving on to household spending, I think the most significant thing to note here is that each of these bars, so again referring to GAFO, food and beverage, neighborhood goods and services. What we have is that when we look at the primary trade area, we have less average household spending. Because, and we've talked about the lower incomes in your primary trade area. We start moving to the secondary trade area, and we see much higher neighborhood goods and needs for neighborhood goods and services, a lot more spending in neighborhood goods and services, and then we see a fall when you get to the tertiary trade area. So, generally we're seeing the lowest spending and the lowest population in the primary trade area. What we're basically saying is that, White Plains needs to successfully pull from primary, secondary, and tertiary. You have a really diverse market. You have folks that, we need to try to balance their needs through the kind of retail offerings that we have. So throughout the pandemic, we acknowledge that there's a lot of hybrid work. Folks are going hybrid. There's some communities that are seeing this as an opportunity because folks are staying home and spending more locally. In office-driven environments, it can be just the opposite. In office-driven environments, If people aren't there, they're not spending during the day, and we have been seeing decreased retail demand in many of these environments. We looked at your primary trade area. So your primary trade area is where most of your office workers are spending their money. So we wanted to do this analysis and say, how much demand do we see from all of these customer groups, from your residents, from your employees, and from your hotel visitors? And how do we translate that to square footage? So in your primary trade area, we calculated that before we get to hybrid work, this is pre-COVID, you probably had about 676,000 square feet of retail demand from those three categories. The nice thing in many ways about White Plains is that you have a large public administration and healthcare employee base who are not working remotely. So we did make some assumptions that there is some remote work, but in many ways, the decrease in employee-generated spending is really minimal. So we did assume that COVID hit you a little bit. So you have a decrease in demand to about 632,000 square feet. Not significant, which I think is good news, right? A lot of places we're working in now, hybrid work is affecting them quite a bit, but we think you're going to weather this storm pretty well. We did incorporate in our demand projections, I do want to note your pipeline of development, which in the coming years is about 6,358 units spread out over 35 projects, which you see here. And so our demand projections reflect that. And this is, I want to sort of describe what you see here. So we look at demand assuming two kinds. It's sort of a range. It's a range assuming low productivity and high productivity businesses. In a lot of downtown environments, smaller businesses that are selling less are low productivity, just to sort of be generic about this. Higher businesses with higher volume of sales, we call them high productivity businesses. So when you go to a mall that has a lot of national retailers, that we'll call those high productivity businesses. And what we see is that in environments, in downtown environments like Mamaroneck Avenue and other environments, you see downtown environments throughout White Plains. Generally, we're seeing like lower productivity businesses. These are your services, your nail salons, your salons. These are businesses that are not generating the same kind of profit, right? So you can have more of them. If they're not generating as much profit, you can have more of them. So that's why you see the spread. You can support more low productivity businesses than you can high productivity businesses. So if we look at our projections, assuming that pipeline in 2022, you can support about 2.7 million square feet of retail under this low productivity amount. And if it's high productivity, about 2.3. So the spread, we think, through this analysis, you can support in downtown White Plains between 2.2 to 2.7 square feet of retail. And that's the important thing to take away. We think that's going to increase by about 2.5% by 2027 and by about 4.8% by 2032. So the trend line will go up with the pipeline that we discussed a moment ago. So you can see sort of the range. Now we're going to apply that to the amount of retail square footage you actually have. So I know you like this slide, Chris, right?
If we take nothing else away from this evening, this
is the slide. I'll try to do it justice because I'm filling in for my colleague who did the analysis. But so the dotted line you see reflects that 2.7 million square feet of demand. When we look at your retail supply in 2022, you've got the space that you have that basically you're on par. You've got non-mall retail space and mall space that does not include the Galleria. basically makes up about 2.7 million square feet. If you add the Galleria and you add sort of the gyms and the banks and the cinemas, which technically are not considered retail, that's an additional 940,000 square feet. So in some ways, I think this is really good news. When you look at that bar, what you have, take away Galleria and take away gyms, banks, and cinemas, is about right-sized. You're not oversupplied, which for us is a shocking takeaway as well, because we don't often work in environments that are not significantly oversupplied with retail.
Isn't that not real? The assertion you're making is fantasy.
What do you
There's
mean?
850,000 square feet sitting.
Of the gallery mall.
Oh, that little rounding error.
No. It is not a rounding area. What we're saying is that with the redevelopment of the Galleria Mall, the right sizing of retail, you're slightly oversupplied.
If you eliminated it, if you bulldozed it, you'd be at the right size.
Today.
Today.
I'm gonna talk, but
Today.
But
So,
that's what the graph says.
yeah. And what we're seeing is vacancy rates that are commensurate with the fact that you have some oversupply in your market. So when you look at your vacancy in your malls, for instance, is about 21%. Double digits, that's really quite high. This speaks to what you're saying. There is oversupply at what we see in our market today. But what we want to say is that you are in a position where you can right-size your retail. Yes, there is a current oversupply, but we see, I want to paint the positive picture for you. We see an opportunity where you can make this right.
And I'll just add to that, and we know for a fact that when the gallery is developed, there will be significantly less than 865,000 square feet, significantly. So I think that right sizing also will
Who's
be
the
one
current
consideration.
owner? So, Chris, if you can't answer that, you're telling me again, when we redevelop, who's the current owner?
No, it's
It's a complicated story,
No,
right?
it's
So
a
what-
pretty straightforward story, and I'll just say that there will be, I would say, in the next year or so, consideration of some sort of concept plans at that site. But all I know, and I can tell you, is that it will be significantly less, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a quarter of that traditional retail.
And what
so
we
that's gonna be a big change.
what we saw, and
Aerial
it's
bank.
on this slide,
Aerial bank.
was that the retail, the current 865,000 square feet, the plans were to reduce that to about 300,000 square feet and maybe
Approximately, in
less.
concept, and
it
less.
could be less.
And much more experiential retail is what we're seeing,
Yeah.
not the traditional, which is a different model altogether.
Yeah.
Almost akin to some of the gyms that
Yeah.
you're talking about.
And when we look at, what you have, if we were to look at the range of, this range we were talking about between low productivity and high productivity, you, again, we're seeing your high productivity basically is on par with your demand. And in fact, your low productivity environments are wonderful environments too. We want services, we want, it's not a pejorative to say that something's low productivity, although it may sound like it, but those environments are the kind that give us your mom and pop stores and these everyday uses that we want to encourage and support. Okay, so in terms of a takeaway, your retail inventory, if it's right size, can be at parity with your demand. As you think ahead and use the comp plan to make decisions about how much new retail, we're saying that don't add too much retail space, if any, as you think about the decisions that you're making with respect to development. You do not want to oversupply this market. You are in a very competitive market. Westchester and its environs are very competitive. GAFO is the predominant segment for retail demand in downtown. It's not uncommon. I think what's unique, as we said, is that you're trying to, downtown has two masters. You've got, these destination oriented shopping districts, and then you've got Mamaroneck Avenue and your offerings, which are much more sort of local in nature. And then your healthcare employment, makes your downtown much more resilient. So we like seeing that too. So closing this out on administrative capacity, I always look at this map. We did sort of a mapping of what your organizational landscape is, and where they fall. You know, what organizations are working at the Westchester, at the county level, at the city level, and at the downtown level. And we group them by type of organization. So you're very rich in organizations that address the arts and work in community development. You're very rich in economic development at the county level and at the White Plains level. Where we see a little bit of a deficiency is in downtown, and with the exception of the Business Improvement District. So we want to point that out, you know, the need for viable partners, and the importance of the Business Improvement District to everything that happens in downtown, quite frankly.
I do want to add, because I did review this, the White Plains Performing Arts Center will make sure that makes in the arts and community. Mr. Iowa as well.
It's always helpful to get real-time feedback like
Yeah.
that. Okay. So, you know, I just want to suggest sort of 3 guiding principles for next steps. We know that we want to improve the physical conditions of place by removing what I call moments of friction for visitors. We do not want to put any barriers in front of a customer who wants to come to downtown White Plains to shop and visit. You have a discerning customer base, you have a high-income customer base who can jump in their car and go anywhere. The minute you make it harder for them or more uncomfortable for them to come to downtown White Plains, that's the minute they go somewhere else. So we want to be competitive with the other options they have. The second is, we'd like to invest in your small businesses, sort of these lower productivity tenants who create really interesting environments. We want to help them, and we want to target them, and we want to attract a diverse set of businesses to your downtown. We know that these businesses are often really undercapitalized. They don't have access to expertise and technical assistance often to be really competitive and to improve their offerings. And then third, there are a number of administrative and regulatory barriers that are increasing the cost of doing business, or making it harder for businesses to do what it is that they do well. And so we'll go into that in a moment. So walking through physical conditions, getting to downtown, accessing downtown, making sure that people know where to go and that they can orient themselves to whether it's parking, amenities, pedestrian wayfinding and gateway signage. Is something that we think would be a wonderful asset and contribution to downtown. Storefront signage, as I said, this is a very low-hanging fruit. Pedestrian-oriented signs, blade signs we call them, are really valuable to businesses, and you can certainly work to address any of the regulatory barriers or barriers that we noted in the deeper dive study that right now are making it harder for businesses to do the right thing by their storefronts and by their customers. Mid-block crossings with a focus on Mamaroneck Avenue, so that we can decrease the distance between businesses and we can help support co-location, which we know makes for better business environments. Lighting, particularly the walk from the station to downtown is an area where we think we could use some lighting and to address street and safety concerns and address dark areas. So we'd like to suggest conducting a more detailed light audit of downtown and then working through a number of lighting strategies, creative strategies. They're wonderful strategies. There's no shortage of ways in which we can address lighting, but we do need to be targeted in where those improvements can and should go. And there are many cities that have advanced elements and improvements in lighting. Business or technical assistance to downtown retail tenants. You have a number of vacancies in downtown, and we sort of share an idea from a community that we worked with in upstate New York, a business competition that encourages businesses to move to vacant spaces. And this program has been incredibly successful, working with property owners, identifying businesses, encouraging their opening in vacant spaces, and creating really dynamic environments. So these are very targeted programs. Business management and operation support. So we know that permitting processes can be confusing for prospective businesses. We want to shorten the time to their permit. We want them to open the doors sooner. That is a hurdle to entry when it takes a long time to open up your business. So by working to develop an online portal that really provides business owners with a much more clear platform and the tools to make that process more streamlined and intuitive. And then, finally, really focused on the signage permitting process and the staffing needing to make that happen. We heard that there are opportunities to improve that process, thinking through, how we encourage the kind of signage that we know really, as I said, is baseline for great environments, both blade signs and A-frame signs as well. And so we'd like to make that process more streamlined. We think we should review your parking ratios and modify those to align with standards that are more appropriate for downtown environments, and in line with your competitors as well in your market. And actually, this is a summary of recommendations that I just walked through for each. By no means, fully comprehensive, but just sort of the direction that we're beginning to think we'd like to go with your, as the elements of the comp plan that are related to your downtown. So with that, I will pause to answer questions. Should I walk around?
Yeah, you come to our side.
Like last week, I'll be taking notes on here, and Sarah's taking notes on the computer. The meeting record.
So I guess if there's no did you have a question? I was going to maybe, to facilitate the discussion, because I think there's a lot of information here, obviously. You can see this ahead here. I know we have several business owners here, obviously at the table and on the committee itself, and even business owners or property owners. So I didn't know if maybe a few of us, or maybe start with you, Aaron, if there's anything, from your perspective, not to put you on the spot as a business owner here in White Plains, in terms of how your experience has been, challenges, just kind of spark that.
Like everybody knows and says, permitting is a huge deal in White Plains. There are a lot of challenges. Personally, I love rules, so it was okay, but it wasn't great. Particularly the water department was very difficult to deal with and actually cost us a lot of money. The sign, I'm curious about the blade signage, because I think that adds like a ton of character to a neighborhood, obviously, as you said. But I know the sign permitting is a whole other thing, and I ended up just using a sign place in White Plains because I know they know the permits, and they had to go in and do a presentation, and I didn't have the bandwidth at that time to like really go through that entire process. And they knew how to do it, so I'd be curious to know if it was like easy to do that, because then we could all just throw up blades. Very interested if there's something with investing in small businesses. Rents are very, very high. I'm in the process of opening up a business, and it's very expensive. And so if there's like some sort of incubation system that the city could do, that would be amazing. Like rents on Mamaroneck Avenue are in the tens of thousands of dollars, and I think you said mom and pop businesses, and I wanted to laugh because like I can't even imagine who would be able to do that. Even though I own a mom and pop business, but it was really hard, and it's really hard. So I guess those are my initial first thoughts.
Are blade signs prohibited?
I just don't know. Like,
Yeah, I don't
I'm
know.
curious
I
about
can,
it.
I guess
I would
from
love
the
for it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the challenge, I should say, and I think Larissa did a great job at identifying is when they extend above the city's right-of-way, there's certain other license agreements, et cetera, that have traditionally been required, for liability and the like. So I think that's been a challenge on Mamaroneck Avenue because of the sort of historic building stock and the way the right-of-way is constructed. Not to say there's not an opportunity to revisit that. I do know that The elegant example that was shown on Church Street, right, kind of near the planning department office and Fukuda Chow in that building, does work well. There's somewhat recessed, there's a different right of way, but all that to say, I think one of the recommendations I think was in here that we didn't really hit on specifically is very specific design or graphic design guidelines that kind of have standards that could be sort of, I don't want to say off the shelf, but easily approved, right? Streamlined in the sense that the design review board doesn't have to review everything so specifically under the current regulations. So I think there's definitely opportunity. And when I reviewed this, it is, I don't want to use the word cumbersome, but I know it is challenging. We deal in the planning department with a lot of kind of smaller businesses, the design review board, and just even the administrative process of going to get a permit, much less building out of space, is challenging. So I think the online portal is a great recommendation, and things we've already started thinking about in-house about how can we be more, I don't want to say business friendly, because I always say White Plains is business friendly, but enhance that sort of, the opportunities for folks to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I call now my friend at the business department all the time, just
Yeah.
because I don't know. I mean, I don't know how, it seems like a daunting task to put everything online, but I really do call constantly, like, is this allowed? Can I put this on my permit? Or like, what's the process? The permit submission process is pretty hefty.
Yeah.
Like, if it was like a one sheet thing where you could just, like email, that would be amazing. But, it's like,
I can say the building
many copies, and
Yeah.
it's a big thing.
The building department, I know, has been working, Commissioner Amadio, for quite a while to try to, there is some online ability, right? There's a portal, but to be able to do full submissions is challenging.
Yeah.
But for signage permits and things like that, perhaps there's that opportunity, we think, because of just the smaller scale. And then the incubator, I'd almost turn it to Larissa as an expert about we've talked a lot about getting grants for incubation, small business, but it's very challenging, and maybe
Yeah.
experiences you could speak to.
Yeah, that example is not an incubator, but rather a way to work with property owners who are open to participating in a process where you're not suggesting that they give anything, space away for free, but rather you're helping curate opportunities and promote and raise awareness of their space and giving businesses the opportunity to win a competition, which helps them with their business plan as well. So it can be a business plan competition, for instance, that if you win the competition, you receive, an award, a small grant, technical assistance, and you're put in a space that is affiliated with a property owner who's participated in this process. And we've worked with multiple communities who have been able to diversify their mix with really creative businesses, and through that process raise awareness that it's a marketing tool at the same time. It doesn't, it's so critical for a business to have that, promotional support, and to win this competition, and they get media associated with it. And then, the benefit is it communicates that, the city is really focused on, attracting interesting businesses, and it gives you a little bit of buzz. Retail areas need marketing and promotion and buzz.
Can you tell me in the United States, where is retail, physical brick and mortar retail growing?
It's so, I appreciate you asked that. I would say nowhere.
Correct. So that's
Yeah.
that's a tsunami going on in retail, right? The
Yeah.
entire way that we buy things has been transformed in the last 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So that's a backdrop to the whole discussion, right? The business that you're describing, the incubator, the get people excited. Can you tell me of a peer city like White Plains where they do that and it's been successful? Because I know it's very successful in incredibly distressed places where basically there is nothing going on. And guys can go in and they get great opportunities because there is nothing going on. White Plains, as you demonstrated, is a very affluent place. The average core retailer a customer was making 3 times the national average. Yes, there are downtown vacancies, which you highlighted is because we have close to 900,000 square feet of space we don't need, right? And if that was gone, right, basically you'd be at capacity and you'd be maybe looking to do a modest build out. But we're not in that kind of distress where property owners are saying, yeah, let's have a competition, let's have a play. Our gang's coming into town and we're gonna set up a movie. They're sophisticated, they wanna get paid, they want their space, none of these guys are giving anything away, as she just said. There's no deals on Mamaroneck Avenue. And that's an indication that the landlords aren't making deals. So if you're in a really distressed place, those deals are doable. But these guys, the folks that own the properties, have been here for a long time. The mortgages are paid. These things are cash machines. They can wait a long time for a tenant. And they're looking at 6,000 new apartments being built, and they don't have to do a damn thing except sit there. So when you say you want to partner with these guys, they already figured that they're a partner. When you release a space from any retail owner, he's effectively your partner because he's one of your largest costs, the rent you pay every month, right? So he's already your partner. He already feels that way. So I don't see we don't have enough of motivation on the part of the landlords to say, let's ignite our retail thing with entrepreneurial stuff. I think they're saying, go build the 5,000 more units and I'll be sitting here waiting. And oh, by the way, you're going to get rid of 800,000 square feet of space, which is going to create more demand for what I've got.
Well,
And that's what the mindset.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I will say, right now, we're working in New Rochelle where they have, a pipeline of similarly, many thousand square feet of retail. We have property owners who have built ground floor retail space that they cannot fill. And they are subsidizing. These are national developers, some of the largest regional developers, in the region, who are subsidizing coffee shops, smaller businesses, because they understand that a great retail environment is not going to be a bank, a Subway, chains.
Another CVS.
Or a CVS,
I'm a very
so the idea that there's a role to support curation in light of the fact that you're right, individual property owners are going to make individual decisions if they're not cooperating and working with each other, but we have worked in environments where they're not distressed environments, where the city plays a role in being an intermediary, saying let's work together, let's try to curate something that's elevated and improved, and we can help you find interesting tenants for spaces that may very well, because there's an oversupply, remain vacant. We want to get ahead of that. And
You identified an area where this is an area where the city is weak, right? That the administrative support side, other than the BID, there's nothing there, really.
Yes, yes.
Right, and so developing that leadership role at the city level that's real meat and potatoes, that can get the attention of landlords rather than trying to find one or two, but as a organization promoting this, that's another part that has to be plugged into that, so that you can get the attention of the big landlords, because you're coming at it from the city, not like, hey, you got a great idea, I want to have but if you come at it as an institutional part of the city, that has power, I think.
John, do you want to add? I see.
Yeah, and I don't know that we have a formal business development office in White Plains. We do not, to my knowledge. I can only reiterate a situation that was presented to me. It always seems like it's less time, but it's probably 10 years ago, when for a period of about a year, I got regular calls from the business development office in Stamford. And they were offering me significant grants if I would open up a retail business in the downtown. Now, I brought this up in another meeting at some point, and there may be some New York State prohibition against this. I don't really know that for sure. But, for example, they had small space retail in the downtown. I think it was Bedford Street, and they offered us $25,000 upon signing of the lease and another $25,000 on our one-year anniversary. Now, we chose not to do it. It wasn't right for us at the time, but they were actively soliciting retailers to open stores, and they were doing it with cash.
Tommy, can you get more information on that program? Because Thomas Madden, who is now BFJ on our team, was the Economic Development Director for the city of Stamford. So we can track down some more information on that. And then look.
I don't have any more than that, other than I answered the phone, but.
I mean, that's a great, you know, we should look into how they were doing that and if there is some prohibition.
You know, I could tell you, if you're opening a small retail business, a check for $25,000 goes a long way.
I need $150,000 right now. I have a lease across.
And if I could just dovetail, I think what Michael was saying, what you've said, John, Larissa. I'm on the road a lot in the city. I deal with every neighborhood association. I've been with the city now 7.5 years in every neighborhood. I do get a lot of questions when it relates to retail. The two questions I get most frequently is kind of what you said, Michael. Or the most frequent comment is, these landlords that, have historically owned a lot of the buildings in our downtown have really no incentive to rent, right? When they're waiting for the next bank on their corner, that locked in 20-year lease, triple net lease, et cetera, that there's a substantial tax benefit to perhaps keeping their spaces vacant. And so the incentive's just not there, right? And that speaks to what you're talking about, John. And the second thing is this notion of curation. So, I get all the time the question, why can't White Plains downtown have the sort of independent bookstore or the independent coffee shops, save for, say, Hastings or a new one on Mamaroneck Avenue, that, Ossining or Peekskill or Beacon, some of the artsy communities have. Nyack. And my response, again, not a retail expert, is obviously those are different market shares. The rents are very different.
Right.
Some of them are at varying degrees of revitalization from what were formerly, cheaper rents, more distressed communities, industrial communities and the like. Rochelle and Yonkers has benefited that way too, with sort of historic architecture and that ability to kind of have that, kind of urban vibe or adaptive reuse. So those two issues constantly come up, and they sort of, I think there's got to be a way to be able to knit them together, find the opportunity, but they almost seem to be working at cross purposes based on the price per square foot that the rents command here. So,
If I may say, when you do this work, you work with the sites where there are opportunities, the landlords where there are opportunities. You're going to walk into there are X number of vacancies on Mamaroneck Avenue. Not every owner is going to want to participate in this exercise. There are owners, for instance, who may be local, may have had vacancies. Every vacancy has its own story. May be interested in working on this. You have to. I would say you have to work with the 20% of the people who are with you. Ignore the 20% who are completely against, who are never going to be part, and the rest are waiting to see. When you start a program, and this could be a pilot program, where we say we understand that we have information about the pipeline, the kinds of residents that are coming that others don't have. We can help communicate this opportunity so that we can get in front of businesses who understand that their market is coming here. And then we can help them through, financing or support. It might be tenant improvements, permitting, et cetera, to get them in this space when the businesses come. I
think I don't want to be negative. I think it is a great opportunity. But it needs this holistic approach, which you highlighted. You said, hey, this needs something to be championed. And you need to embed it in the plan, which is what we're addressing here. We're talking about the plan. Embed this kind of thinking. Why do I 4 or 5 times a year get in my car and pay a toll to go to Nyack weekend? Right? Why do I do that? When I'm living, why do I want to eat in the restaurant there? I don't want to eat here. I want to go over there. What's going on, right? Isn't this quote unquote a cooler place? Really? Isn't it supposed to be? No. That's like what you're getting at. It's like this intersection of leadership and the curation and finding a champion. Maybe there is that 20% that you can cultivate, and I think that would be a great opportunity.
One thing. I hear Linda.
Sorry.
I've heard it. Go ahead, Linda.
I'm getting ready to throw something
throw something at you.
The one person I can't
No,
say.
go ahead, I'll.
No, I wasn't gonna, no, for real, go ahead.
So I just wanted to expand this a little bit because I know we're really talking about the vacancies and that's so important. I agree 100%. But I'm also really concerned when we talk about the concept of business development that's initiated by the city. I'm really worried about preventing vacancy and holding on to our small businesses. Just coincidentally, over the past couple of weeks, I've probably had 5 conversations with small business owners that are terrified that they cannot sustain themselves in White Plains. And so when we just started having conversation about what happens, I have to tell you, I was very, very surprised and I never thought about it from their perspective. These are business owners that are right here on Mamaroneck and Main and on Court Street. The Court Street small business owners are really at high risk for shutting down right now as a direct result of us using Court Street for all of our events. All of the events that we do there have decreased the revenue for the small businesses, which I was like, well, but we're bringing people to your street. And they're like, but once they come to the street, they're coming for the farmer's market, they're coming for the movie on the big, shutting down for movie or the yoga event or the Christmas. They're not going into the restaurant. So they're really hurting. They've gotten together to talk to the property owner, and the property owner is holding fast saying, that property owner is passing along the taxes and their finances to the renters, so the rent stays high, their revenue's decreasing, so they're very much like, we are not going to be able to sustain. And I don't think that that's an unusual story. I think the unusual story is that they're seeing as linked to events, but how many other retailers, small business, do we see all along these corridors that come in and are eager and then, in a flash, they're gone? So I am no expert in this area at all, but I would love to just put on the table if the concept of this business development, emphasis could include how can we support current business owners as well.
That's the gold star comment of the evening. I agree with you wholeheartedly that these street events are detrimental to business. What concerns me greatly is now they have spilled into Mamaroneck Avenue, and we've had Mamaroneck Avenue closed 3 or 4 times in the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I shop the Avenue all the time, predominantly eating, sadly, but I shop the Avenue, and everybody is just off the charts crazy about, they shut me down for an evening, it cost me $2,000, it cost me $3,000. And they're angry.
Yes.
And these are people that are paying significant retail rents,
Yeah.
significant. So
I think this is really, a fascinating
I am,
Well, you just.
Sorry.
yeah, just to finish the thought, I am personally of the opinion that these streetscape things are detrimental to the business owners and not helpful. I mean, we had a giant rock concert. It was July or August, I can't remember.
July.
And I had dinner reservations at Morton's. I had to walk around the whole city. I wouldn't have gotten into Morton's if Commissioner Chong didn't see me and walk me through the ropes to get into Morton's. Morton's was deserted. Myself and another businessman in town were the only 2 people in the place.
And I wouldn't even try to go to Morton's when there's an event.
Yeah, so I don't understand the business development mentality attached to these events. Maybe a greater mind than mine think it helps. I don't think it helps.
And can I just add one more kind of anecdotal stat? So, what's our wings place here?
Buffalo
Buffalo
Wings.
Wings. So this past weekend, on Saturday, we had the big event with free concerts. Sunday, there was a charge for concerts. Buffalo Wild Wings has noticed a significant change in revenue based on the day that the concerts were free versus the day that there was a fee for the concerts. I don't know again what that means.
Which day was their drop? The day it
When
was.
you pay.
When you had to pay.
Yeah. No money
Yes.
for wings.
No money for wings,
Yeah.
right? I had to pay for my ticket, no money for
Yeah.
wings. Anyway, I didn't want to jump in there, but I felt like it was an embellishment of what you were talking about.
It's a valid point.
I think it's a really, I mean, this is something we need to discuss. And I also, I mean, this is really good insight. And I think, there is potential, I'm going to go back to Galleria, there's potential with the redevelopment of that huge land area to maybe get some additional space to get an event off the street, perhaps. I mean, that may be something, there may now be a
Maybe
bit
that's the
more.
forum for these sort of one-off events, so
And
that
maybe
you don't take
not
away the
participate.
streetscape from the guys who are paying the rent in the rest of the city.
Right, perhaps like if you're thinking about like in New York City, I think street events probably do bring businesses, but it's a much more walking environment. People aren't driving there.
We don't have a
So
Central Park.
if you can't get there,
Slightly changing it.
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, first, I have a couple of points, but as far as the street events, I walk for the most part here, so I think that tucking them away is like getting rid of a major attractive characteristic of an event like that, where it's visible, bringing community together. But I think, and I've seen that happen in other areas. I used to live in Los Angeles. There was a farmer's market that I would go to, very popular, but on that day, every business on that street hated that farmer's market because they would eat there, they would patronize that instead of where they would normally go, etc. So I wonder if there's a way to, when these events are reimagined and rediscussed, which I'm sure will happen, to involve, I don't know how much they're considered stakeholders in this discussion, probably not. But what the point that I had thought about earlier is similar to the education for getting permits and business development. Once we make these changes, reducing parking, getting rid of one-way streets, I know that those business owners, whether or not it's true, will probably get scared and say, you're taking away parking, you're taking away this, you're taking away that, and I'm already struggling. How do we get ahead of that and say, oh, look, this is a part of a bigger process, it will help, and we might need to help you separately, whether through a subsidy or something, right? So they don't feel like they're being left in the lurch, right? Because we know that this is positive, but they might not see it because they're seeing their, rent for next month due, right? Not the whole picture.
If I could add, that, I guess my philosophy is when we work with our public sector clients is that the job is to stage the customer, right? To make it easier for the customer to arrive, to leave, to park, to, walk by whatever, and to create an environment where let the business owner do what they do inside the business well. Like, we're not going to tell them how to run their business. So when I say all that to say, the recommendations that are associated with the physical improvements, for instance, we know that when businesses have better signage, their sales increase. We have that data. We know that when it's why I harp on signage is like, if you don't have that, just get it done.
Yeah.
We know that pedestrian activity increases. So those two things alone make a very big difference. And so, that's one way in which we can help create an environment that results in more successful businesses. We know that co-location of businesses is so critical. When someone knows they can go downtown and they can shop at 3, 4, 5 places, and visit easily, conveniently, without too much difficulty, they're more likely to go there than somewhere else. So how can we remove that challenge of crossing the street easily? I mean, these seem like very basic things, but almost every environment we walk in gets the basics wrong. And there's a reason why shopping centers, generally do it better, is because it's a single owner who can make these decisions unilaterally. And we know that downtown environments have many owners and many stakeholders, and it's sometimes harder to get these very simple things done. But we know we have to get them done, because the shopper does not differentiate between a single owner environment and a multi-owner environment. So, by pointing this out, is there a way we can just make it easier for a business to succeed by improving the conditions around them, right? And that's the role of the public sector anyway,
Yes.
to manage the streets and the sidewalks
Well,
and the
but
driveways.
I just want to make sure that they know that, and they can see
Yeah.
a tangible, right?
That's a
Because
good point,
I can say, oh, it's gonna be amazing, and it will be, but it might not be amazing right away. There might be a learning window for the pedestrian, for the visitor, right? Because if you do this tomorrow, we're all creatures of habit. We're gonna keep doing what we wanna do. You take away the 2 parking spots, oh, where's my parking spot? Right? There's gonna be
Except they will
wayfinding.
see the impact of signage immediately.
Sure,
That
but
much I'll say.
I mean, yes, and I agree with you. Sorry, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit
Yeah,
here
yeah.
because I hear these stories all the time, right? You're taking away, and tell me business owners if this isn't true, but like taking away a parking space seems like a bad idea. But we know overall it will be a great idea, so how do
Clarify on
we?
the parking, it's not taking away the spaces, it's for businesses for spaces that exist but don't have adequate parking. So if a new business comes in, the code requires a certain number of spaces, and that can be
Yeah.
prohibitive to a business coming in.
It is, and just to get into some of the minutia of the zoning code, which I know everybody's excited about, maybe I shouldn't have prefaced my statement that way. But very often the downtown, a lot of these buildings obviously predate the zoning code, right? Businesses are there when there's a change of use or a different business classification. Very often there's a parking credit. We're not making the new businesses on Mamaroneck Avenue. Obviously, they're not on their 0 lot line sites. They're not providing 75 parking spaces. We have parking capacity in some of our municipal garages. There is a buyout provision when you're doing construct a new space or a new large outdoor dining area that's going to increase the capacity under zoning of your establishment. But there is an ability within the central parking area to do either buyout, and there's some other shared parking, satellite parking. So I do agree that we definitely have to evaluate, I've looked at this for a while, our existing parking requirements, particularly in the downtown. But to your point, Sarah, it's not like, I don't want everybody to think that everybody that comes here can't do business because they have to do 75 parking spots.
Reducing a barrier to
Yes.
the tenant,
Right.
because they're
Yeah.
paying, either they're paying to buy out.
Of those
like,
spaces.
It's a
Yeah, I'm
cost
sorry, I
associated.
misunderstood
Oh, no,
your
no, no.
question. Now that I understand it, in many of the places where we work, businesses are not the ones who are saying they need 13 spaces per 1,000 square feet.
Got it.
They're actually saying they don't need that much.
Yeah.
And then the city's turning around and saying, no, you do, because we're telling you you do.
Right.
And that's actually more common. So they want that requirement alleviated or reduced. They'll make the decision for themselves how much parking they think they need. And they want to be in a place that gives them the right amount of parking, but you don't want to require more than they actually think that they need. And if you're in a walkable environment, they'll say, I think most of my customers are probably going to walk. Like, don't make me provide parking, or even the buyout, like they may say, I may not want to buy. Like that's the discussion that you have.
And, just before, this discussion will certainly come up in the Live White Plains. We talk about residential development, because it's not just the commercial, it's even the residential developers that are questioning
Yes.
the parking in a downtown environment. So lots to talk about parking.
Well, this is the clash of cultures. We have everyone in this room who's lived in Westchester drives. We're not a walking culture in White Plains. White Plains thrived after World War II because there were B. Altmans and Bloomingdale's, and everyone could get in their car and in 20 minutes be shopping in some emporium, right? That was its raison d'etre. My mother from New Rochelle in 1956 would drive from New Rochelle to White Plains, right? Because the shopping was fabulous, right? So, and it has the legend of Mamaroneck Avenue with the shopkeeper, thousands of shops, whatever. And everyone in this room probably has a couple cars somewhere in their driveway, doesn't really walk anywhere, and we're going to change that culture, right, with the guys in this room, right? Not guys from Manhattan, not guys in high-density areas, guys who are living on a quarter of an acre or half an acre with a house. Now, we're building 6,000 units, and there's a lot of changes happening downtown, so you've got this culture clash of, I want it really easy and frictionless. I want to pull up in front of the camera store, get in my car, get out of my car, go buy the whatever it is, and come back and get in my car and go. I've had guys in the CNA say that. It's like, the town is changing. This is crazy. I can't pull up in front of where I want to buy my stuff. And I'm not going in those garages. We have 10,000 spaces. I would bet you, the occupancy rate is very low because people in general, unless you have to go into the garage, avoid them. So there's this clash of culture that is part of, and that's going to be the challenge of everything that you're doing. Everything we're doing in the comprehensive plan is going to have this intersection of where are we going versus your mindset is where have we been?
I will say this transition, for every community that goes through this transition is a challenging transition. And it's challenging for business owners too.
Right.
There exist older businesses who have an existing customer base, who know this business, patronize this business, and drive there, are threatened by changes that make it more difficult for their customers, their historic customers.
Right. Their legacy customers.
Their legacy customers. Thank you. And these are challenging.
This is hard water to navigate.
Yes. And I think we want to be sensitive to that. But we also want to acknowledge that looking forward, the customer base is going to want a different model. We are looking at an urban environment, a walkable environment. The most successful, mixed-use urban environments are walkable and comfortable. This is where people choose to move. It's interesting. New York City post-COVID, residential rents. And Williamsburg, if you look, there's a New York Times piece or Wall Street Journal on Williamsburg. People want to move to these neighborhoods because now that it's hybrid, where they live has to be a wonderful place, right? We want people to continue to want to live in White Plains. And I will say New Rochelle's going through this same thing too. They want people to want to live in New Rochelle. And the concern is that, that the amenities aren't there, the walkable environment isn't there. There's certain baseline expectations that you have to meet if it's also a wonderful place to live.
Well, one of the things I'm getting at though, it's that legacy part of it. And I've talked about this a little bit at the CNA, which is not what this is about. But I was saying to somebody, there's going to be 10,000 new residents in the next 5 to 10 years in downtown White Plains. Who represents those neighborhoods? The building owners that they're paying. The renters don't get to do that, right? And then you look at who's all the members of the CNA. It's Gedney Farms, it's Fisher Hill. These are all these outlying neighborhoods, which are not going to be walking anywhere. Not walking from Gedney Farms. In other words, all of the people who are shaping this, or the constituents, are people who live basically in single-family homes for the most part. And the town is changing its core dramatically. Chris,
two things. Very appreciate. One is the whole name of this initiative, right? One White Plains was very calculated. When I thought of a name and we as a staff thought about this, clearly there's 28 neighborhood associations, and I don't know if you've seen my aerial photography, it shows the boundaries and they merge to one, right? So, we have a strong history here, legacy of strong neighborhoods and a council of neighborhood association. So clearly, even in putting together this committee and the full complement of the committee, every community is represented, people that live in apartments, people that walk. So the goal is, as representatives, right, of the entire city populace, that we're going to get all those ideas. And that's the beauty of this process. And to think differently, and even in the past 15 months, before we even got to this point in the planning process, we did a lot of what we call listening tours. So we went out into a lot of the areas of the city that we know weren't as involved in the 1997 plan or the 2006 update. So the hope, and we've been successful, Mike, to date, is really getting those different perspectives. And the one thing I'll say about the parking, and I don't want to belabor, but the biggest conundrum we're going to deal with, again, when we get to Live White Plains, looking at downtown residential development, is what we saw during the 15-month public planning process for the transit district. Linda Popolo was at the planning department at the time as deputy, and we heard the biggest debate in the redevelopment of the city-owned property next to the Metro North Station in White Plains, right? We own 4.5 acres, the city. was whether or not that parking structure that currently houses about 950 automobiles, what the fate of that should be. Should it be, when I go to the council neighborhoods, everybody from the south that drives there and has their permit and parks on top of what is the most valuable station in Westchester County? Or is it a redevelopment to re-knit the urban fabric that perhaps was altered during urban renewal for the benefit of not just the populace here in White Plains, but the greater region? And that's the push-pull. You're exactly right. So it's just kind of back and forth, whether it's about retail or residential. The automobile, the term suburban city, what are we? These are all issues we want to get at by virtue of having stores.
And we're doing it.
And
But
we're doing it.
but it is,
It's a challenge.
it's a, it is.
That's why we're at the
Attention
it is-
is real.
it is-
Attention's real. I hear it all
No,
the time.
it is.
I want to, Mr. Didny.
I've just learned that if I ever, God help me if it happened, get elected to the city council, I'm not going to sit in that seat. This has been terrific. Larissa, I've been around here a long time. I want to thank you for giving us a financial and data-driven logic to how to approach this problem. You've given us the beginning of a very dynamic model on what we have to do to address all these problems. And this brainstorming tonight, I think, has been probably, from all the different people, and I know most of you, I don't know everyone, this has been one of the most insightful because of your leadership, because you enlivened us, you gave us insights, and you stimulated those sort of sleeping neurons in our brain that have struggled with this problem. And I can only imagine what it would be like when a group of businessmen who are struggling hear you. Because I am so stimulated by what you've said tonight in terms of the model, the levers, the pushing and pulling it's going to take for us to accommodate all these many different inputs that we have here. And a couple of quick, so I think you've created the beginning of an implementation model. And I don't think we can wait till we go through all the different pillars to start thinking of implementation, because until we do that, we're not going to be ready to inform other things as well. So there's a second phase toward implementation. The insights that Michael has given, other insights that are here tonight, John's experience. One quick story. Last Sunday was my wife's birthday. Somehow, miraculously, all the kids, except one couple, could come to a dinner. We could have dinner together that she didn't have to cook. So we found that great Portuguese Brazilian restaurant over in Silver Lake. Aquario. Lovely food, great vino verde. I make a reservation. We got a little tiny one that is on the ceiling. So I said, I got it all worked out. And I wanted to go over to make sure the table was perfect. If you tried to get into Silver Lake last Sunday, there were at least 10,000 people. I'm not exaggerating. I drove all of Silver Lake for 45 minutes trying to find a parking space. So there is clearly a story to be delved into about events. And we should, and by the way, what Silver Lake has done with their little retail environment over there is sort of textbook. And not for the big events necessarily, but it's become an interesting place to go because the small businessman. So Michael, I don't have to go to Nyack. I've got 2 places now.
I'm at Aquaria once a month, so I'm with you.
Great
Okay,
restaurant.
so but
Drive, you have to drive.
But the
I
point
don't
is,
walk there.
that's a data point. That's
Right.
an analysis to be looked at.
Right.
I think another thing that occurs to me, we need to have Larissa or her people or someone do a sample of what is the real estate story in our 7 little areas. What are the values? What's the income? What are the challenges? Because without understanding, and who's sitting on the sidelines, and I do have, in full disclosure, I have clients in White Plains, they're sitting. And they keep, when is it time? And I keep telling them, you ought to get started. It's too comfortable. But I think that that's another voice, and there's a different presentation. But I think coming from someone who is outside the city, the definition of a good consultant, at least 50 miles out of town, wears a dark suit or a red dress, and if you ask them what time it is, they say, can I borrow your watch? So I think there's another sub-part of your program, maybe with Linda or others, promoting and similar feedback and developing the talent and the capability that you are giving us tonight. I mean, I've learned more tonight about retail, and I've been supposedly learning for a long time. I've learned more about the fundamentals. I've read all the stories of better trees on the streets. I've read all, of course, as I was hearing you speak, I did a quick Google Street View of White Plains. We don't have any blade signs. I don't think we have one. So, but it's a data point. You've opened up so many things, and I think while you're doing the others, Chris, maybe there's a parallel process. We've identified a couple of interest groups. This is all boils down to the property owners. I mean, I think the market, we can figure out how to, but the property owners are a key factor. And for them to have the benefit of what Larissa has told us tonight would be fantastic. And I think it's the implementation phase. I'm an impatient guy, as you know. It's time for implementation, low key, to get going. And can we figure out answers to the questions about John's question on the big outdoor events? Where does that fit? Question on the retail owners, are they holding back? What can we do to stimulate them? Is there something that we can help improve the opportunity for our tenants? Also, what is really going to happen when we have 10,000 new residents? And how do we put some data on online shopping? That's an important part of this equation. And get the data all together, because we got smart people. The great thing about those 26 neighborhood associations, they love White Plains. They love the place. We all love the place. Everybody who knows they're from White Plains, don't you love White Plains? Don't you love White Plains? So we have a rich source of talent, brains, and now we have expertise. And I think that getting that message to revalidate what we're talking about tonight would be a valuable thing as you go to each one after the other. So when you get done, we're not going back, well, let's go back and take a look at, start the implementation low-key, soft, to get us ready for that, because we can't wait.
I think also the beauty of doing what Mike's suggesting is you're getting ahead of the sell. You know, there's going to be this big, oh, now the bow is on this whole plan, and then it's going to go in front of all the legislative bodies, and everyone's going to go, you know, show up at public meetings and pull their hair out. You basically don't want those enemies showing up. You want to basically see if we can get those guys on board with a program. I mean, is someone calling up somebody and saying, hey, I'm going to give you $20,000 to start a business and put it in this? You're going to have takers. You're going to have people being fans of something like that, right? Rather than, okay, well, 2.5 years from now, we're going to have a program. You know?
I'd love to see a pro forma of 2 or 3 typical examples. Have Linda help identify them, look what's out there, because otherwise, policy-wise, we've got a great framework here. It's unbelievable, actually, in one night to hear this framework. Now, if we could get a couple of pro formas of particular people, I think we really have a way to make this, and the time is right, I think, to not wait for, I think, as Michael points out, we can't wait to implement at the end of this process.
If we have, excuse me, sorry, if we have requirements for new buildings coming up for like affordable housing units, could we have like a cheap retail incentive for that? Like, could we require them to have, you know, inexpensive retail spaces?
I mean, I will say one big takeaway is that we don't want to add much more retail to your downtown.
But all of the units going up are mixed use.
But I'm saying in the new development that's coming, we want to make sure that you're not adding significant retail. So if we're looking at filling spaces, it's looking to fill spaces and improve the curation of your existing.
Well, the other thing is you want the ones that are here, and people have talked
do
about
well.
the existing businesses, how do we
Exactly.
uplift them up?
Exactly.
But 2 things about what's, on the ground is, yes, out of those 6,000 units and those 35 projects, most of which are in the downtown, quite a few obviously have a mixed-use component, but very often you'll see food and beverage, right, being the main driver of that space. I talk to developers daily, and you'll often hear them say that, the retail, and we do, the city requires in many instances, especially on these major corridors, retail, whether it be Hamilton, whether it be, South Lexington, areas where we're seeing, some renewed vibrancy. They all refer to it as throwaway space, right? It's not financeable, it's what it is. But it gets into this curation notion of, The city wants it, right? The city has the ability through these approval processes of the common council to require, if not retail, active ground floors, right? Whether it's amenity space, gyms and the like, to activate the street near the train station particularly. But the real fundamental point is we've had a couple council members challenge me in the last year or so on that very issue. The notion, particularly if there's density bonuses and other zoning changes that have occurred, about providing either community and or affordable retail space. I know communities in California have tried it, but to Larissa's point, if we have sort of a saturation and we have mature existing businesses, is that cannibalizing our own? Or is it a pilot where we have nonprofits? I don't know.
I think you want to be very careful about where you're encouraging. You also don't want businesses to locate, even if it's subsidized space or low-cost space, in bad locations, right? That doesn't do anything for a business owner, right? You want to create opportunities for them to locate in places where the ingredients for success are there, you know, and one of the reasons why we talk about, you know, the volume of the street and the speed of street, you know, you want to be careful about putting retail in those locations, and you know, we come across communities all the time that have these requirements. I think it was really popular for, you know, a very long time to sort of require retail. Our mantra now moving forward is focus on your areas where you have existing retail, get it right. You know, your existing corridors, make sure your existing businesses, all the conditions and ingredients are there to make that work. Where you don't have retail, try not to add it. And let's not be afraid of non-retail uses on the ground floor. I know this is probably, you know, very controversial, you know, but I do not think we should be afraid of wonderful ground floor residential space. I just came back from Vancouver, Canada, wonderful downtown. Every tall building right outside the core has residential doors and entrances that front lovely tree-lined streets with two-way cycle paths. You know, we are not Canada, you know, but you know, I take those pictures and I'm like obsessed with taking these pictures because, you know, we cannot continue to put retail space out there that's going to sit vacant or underutilized, or in office space where it's going to end up with the shades down. Anyway, that's not vibrant, that's not active. You know, because I often get this, well, if it's not retail, it's going to be, you know, another commercial use. But you just told me you wanted activity and vibrancy at the ground floor. Another commercial use may very well be, you know, a nonprofit use or an office space that doesn't give you the vibrancy. You just finished telling me you want it. So let's create, you know, opportunities for where the things for which there is demand, which is residential, at the ground floor, and let's not be afraid of. Now I'm really going out on the soapbox, but, you know, like really thinking about why do we prevent that use on the ground floor, and are there design solutions, are there guidelines that create wonderful walkable streets that have ground floor residential? Let's not be afraid of that, because you walk, you know, West End in Manhattan, Sutton Place in Manhattan, these, you know, these are very urban areas that don't have ground floor retail, and people love walking these streets. So, you know, it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge that I pose to you as you think ahead. You know, what's your vision for White Plains? How can you right size? How can you not oversupply your market? Because you're just right there at parity. So this is your moment of caution and an opportunity.
Chris, could you tell us a little bit about what you're able to tell us about the Galleria plan? Because to me,
I mean,
what our speaker was very early, she said, you got this great downtown you got this great transit center, and it's a nexus, and there's a lot of things going on there, and you've got a nice retail, you know, walkable downtown with lots of activity and stuff, and we know that there's this big, you know,
10 acre site
thing there, and it's got, you know, all those blank facades you were talking about, and it's intimidating to walk next to, etc. And it's probably at this point, I don't know, kind of scary even to be out there at certain times of the day, in the evening. So that is the bridge, right? Isn't that the bridge that's going to glue those two things together?
It's the keystone,
Right.
right? It's the keystone between the transit district, which we have identified, and our downtown. So even if you look at that study the city conducted back in 2015 with a lot of robust public input, even the logo represents the train station and the core of our downtown and the connection between the two. I can tell you that, for the first time as of last year or 2 years ago, the entire 10-acre site, save for the city's 3.2 acres of the 10 on the Martine frontage, which is the public parking, right? So the Galleria parking is owned by the city of White Plains. It's intertwined the way the building was constructed. Absent that piece, the linear piece on the Martine frontage, both retail anchor tenants, the whole building's owned entirely same entity, which has significant expertise in downtown retail development, but much more in mixed-use environments. So at this point, one of the, I don't want to say challenges, but one of the things there is that the existing zoning obviously has to be amended. So right now, the local zoning ordinance only allows basically what's there, which is a shopping center. We clearly know that residential, multifamily residential, that's significant density relative to the rest of our downtown is going to be the driver of that redevelopment. I also know from meeting with the folks that this is one of the more valuable downtown locations in the region, if not the country, because of what's going on in White Plains on a per square foot rental basis. I don't know if you've all realized that White Plains recently in a couple of studies is, for better or worse, become the highest median rent for new construction in New York State, and one of the top 20 in the United States. And that's considering the 5 boroughs of New York City, not just Manhattan. People ask me that all the time. So there's a lot of desire for developers to be here. So it's going to be driven by high-density residential, experiential retail, probably, like we said, roughly about a third of what's there now, if that. And what the city will require, clearly in any sort of rezoning, I can say unequivocally, is significant public space, placemaking, and a lot of the things we've talked about today. Not a development that's going to turn its back as a giant super block to Main Street and Martine. And the hope, and my hope, and I'm probably not saying too much, but my hope is that the bulk of that building can go down and it'll be somewhat of a blank canvas for opportunities for redevelopment. Keeping in mind there's significant parking there now, and what's going to be the future if that all becomes privately owned, right? Where does that parking go? Who's parking there? There's a lot of analysis that has to be conducted as part of that redevelopment. But if we get it right, because I grew up going to that mall, I remember it was in its heyday. I remember when it went downhill, and it's come back to a certain extent, of course. If we get it right, it'll be a national model of urban infill redevelopment.
Right.
If we don't get it right, somebody will be complaining about me and the rest of the city for years.
It'll be your black hole of Calcutta.
But what I will say, because we have a history of urban renewal here, and I've learned the whole history, 50 years, what's old is new again. The White Plains Mall, obviously it's got torn down for mixed-use development, where there used to be residential, is that I will not, I speak about urban renewal. There was a need at that time. It was successful in a lot of ways, and now we're trying to kind of go back to establishing the urban fabric we once had with the Galleria. So what's old is new again, a 50-year cycle. We're bringing people back downtown, and hopefully we're able to get this one right, which this plan is going to be intimately involved with, obviously. So that's my rah-rah speech, Mike.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
I actually have a question while we have the consultants here. I personally go back and forth as to whether or not retail can survive, streetscape retail can survive in White Plains, or whether it's dead and we should bury it. And I go back and forth frequently. And forgive the coming pontification, but it does culminate in a question that I think is pertinent. The most successful streetscape retail that I've ever seen, and I'm taking Greenwich Avenue out of the mix because that's not the real world, but the most successful I've ever seen is in London, High Street, Kensington, which is a wide avenue that runs from Holland Park to Hyde Park, and it is almost entirely 3-story red brick residential buildings with retail stores on the bottom, and it's entirely a neighborhood. If you look at the stores that are there, every couple of blocks there's a grocer Every couple of blocks, there's a dry cleaner. And these areas are all separate neighborhoods. And last time I walked that street was just before COVID. So it was the end of 2019. And in a 3.5-mile walk, both sides of the street, I saw one vacant store that was under construction. So completely rented and seemingly very successful. Now, what has allowed me to think that retail might survive in White Plains is all of the new development downtown and getting feet on the ground. But I guess I have a question. Is it the same thing, running 3-story buildings 3.5 miles long, or are we going to be able to successfully get the residents out of their 24th floor apartment, or are they just going to call Uber Eats for somebody to deliver their dinner? I don't know how we get them out of their apartments. Does anybody have any feel for whether or not the high-rise versus the low-rise development as far as supporting a streetscape retail?
I mean, I think higher density, more people, these are folks who are choosing urban environments who, otherwise would not be here if there weren't amenities at the ground floor. Anyone who's developing mixed use right now, towers, larger buildings, recognizes that the value of those apartments actually increases when there are amenities at the ground floor. And often that's why they subsidize a great coffee shop at the ground floor. Because yes, those people leave their apartments and they come down and grab a cup of coffee. That's part of what they're looking for. Otherwise, if it were dead and buried, as you suggested, that's the alternative, the value of those assets would fall.
And I think too, the thing that, and Larissa pointed it out in the presentation, that you have here that is very different than, say, New Rochelle, is that daytime population. You have workers, you have offices, you have the hospitals. There are people here in addition to the residents. And now residents aren't just leaving and commuting to Manhattan, they're staying and at least several days a week working from home. And people want to get out of, if you're in an apartment, I've lived in an apartment for a long time, you want to get out, you want to go walk, and creating that environment, that streetscape environment will be so critical to sort of getting those people out. But I think that the city is sort of in a better position because of that daytime population.
Absolutely. What we found is that, through COVID, the most resilient districts are those that had a balance of office and residential, right? The ones, and in fact, districts that had, a really strong residential customer base, businesses actually, the ones that stayed open, right, did better during COVID than before COVID. You compare that to office-dominant downtowns where everyone left, those businesses shut down, right? So it's actually a sustainability and a resiliency goal, right? To have a mixed-use environment where you have, it's diversifying your customer base. It's, you've got residents, you've got office workers. If anything happens to any one of those customers, your businesses have a better chance of succeeding. And in fact, it increases the length of time. We do this thing called the day part analysis sometimes, where if you've got daytime office workers, there's business during the day. If you have folks who are coming, home after work and then spending at night and going to so we've increased the time during which a business can make money. It goes from being just daytime, 8 hours, to 10, 12, 16 hours during which a business can make a profit, right? And
there is no question people working from home is going to be a boon to the downtown, if that is something that's going to continue, or is that a short-lived phenomenon? And I don't think any of us know that yet.
No, we don't know. What we do know is that it's not going to go away entirely. The extent to which we're going to have hybrid, I think, is up in the air. Is it going to be people working from home 3 days a week, 2 days a week, 1 day a week? It will depend. But we know there's going to be some degree of reduction in the number of days that folks are in. There's sort of no analysis that's coming out that's saying we're not going to see some reduction. How much? I don't know.
Just one thing just to close that I was thinking during this discussion is, part of what's so fascinating here in White Plains is, Yes, it's 6,000 units plus that are in construction. There's more coming still. Developers are still bullish, even with the current, obviously with the current interest rates. Rental market is even, stronger. But this laboratory, in terms of the things that are happening now in White Plains, will offer us, I think, an insightful view into whether or not, for example, the project across from the train station we all see rising, which is the Gateway 2, the Gray Star project, 500 dwelling units, significant retail on Hamilton Avenue in a part of the city that has none. And we'll be seeing throughout this process, the plan will be adopted before that opens, right? Is that all viable? We're seeing it right now with the Mitchell development on Mamaroneck Avenue and Post Road, the new apartment building. There's a significant restaurant retail space on the Post Road corner that was designed specifically, pulled back from the corner for outdoor seating and restaurant use. COVID, et cetera, has caused quite a challenge and thrown a wrench into getting a viable restaurant tenant
Right
there.
across the street are
there's-
two closed restaurants
two
that
closed
were that
restaurants.
had how many hundred seats?
And what we've heard is that there's many of the sim type of uses that might be interested in that space that maybe aren't as vibrant, right, that we have on Mamaroneck Avenue. So, how do we as a city look to activate those spaces on, private property? Do we do kiosks? Do we look at other things that...
Maybe other.
Yeah, so that's sort of the challenge. So I guess what I'm saying is throughout this process, when we get into more of this discussion, these projects are coming online and we will know very quickly what the market will bear as it relates to new development.
As
retail.
another little part of your data set and your lab experiment,
Yeah,
the Continuum
yeah,
and Bank Street
yeah.
both have ground floor retail spaces, right? The Bank Street one's closed, except for the one guy who's got the little cafe thing, and no one's gone into the Continuum, right?
Challenging space.
Right, so, and
Yeah.
they have, how many units are in those couple of thousands, 1,000,
No, not
15?
that. Well, between
No,
all
between
three,
the two of
probably,
them,
yeah,
yeah, you got 1,000 units.
900 units probably.
Right, and they're all, in theory, walking to the train station, and they're not taking one nickel out of their, so I'm not saying it couldn't work, but it's a very challenging thing.
Well, and to Larissa's point about strengthening the core and the existing retail, even Hamilton Avenue, right? You're a block off from there on Hamilton, quite a challenge. So the 440 building you're seeing rising, the old AT&T building, and then wrapping around to Barker, that's 450 some odd units when ultimately completed. There will be a small convenience sort of coffee shop, as you're noting, in the ground floor. But even in the original approval, we worked with the developer, and the market studies were there. There's not going to be successful retail,
Yeah, I think
even one
for
block off.
Hamilton, making Hamilton a successful pedestrian street to enhance that walk from the train is not going to be through ground floor retail.
No.
It's got to be through kiosks, signage, public art, interesting, there's that open space there that has
Trees.
12, well, there's that open space.
Slowing the cars from 50 miles an hour.
Park.
Yes.
Making that is such a strange space to walk by, to just brighten that up and make it a nice place to sit. And, you had, I think one of your recommendations you didn't mention here was like creating outdoor workspaces. And having places in the downtown where people can be, just to create more life, whether people are working on a laptop or not. It's just kind of creating
I
that
would
vibe.
say, increasingly, really practically, we're looking at, design guidelines that require doors, fenestration, windows, entrances and exits to, apartments, which are masonettes below towers. Street trees, really critical, and also, a landscape barrier of 2 feet or so between, an entrance to someone's home and the sidewalk, so it's like a semi-public, semi-private space. Those elements, what we've seen create wonderful walkable environments that do not have retail at the ground floor. And so we're beginning to really encourage and recommend to developers who we work with to explore those avenues.
And the city, to that point, when the rezoning for the White Plains Mall, Hamilton Green, that was a rezoning. Any future rezoning for the Galleria Mall site, I can guarantee will have just those kind of quasi-form-based code elements that talk to all those issues. And that's something perhaps for recommendation moving forward, is to incorporate similar sort of language in some of the existing zoning districts across the city. So
Well, you're talking texture, scale,
blank wall, you cannot,
yeah,
certain
right.
fenestration distances,
What's
tower separation.
human? What do you want?
And it
What
need
John
not
was
be
talking
retail.
about, the third story is kind of like,
Yeah.
feels like I can negotiate this. It's not some hulking.
Private realm, public realm.
Or commercial, may not be retail.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. So good.
Destinations.
So now that we've solved all of the issues.
Destinations.
Well, it's been very helpful, I think.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is great.
Thank you. Our next meeting is November 16th, so 4 weeks from now. At that meeting, we're going to be discussing, it's a little bit, I think we talked about this last meeting, that because we front-loaded our sub-consultants, we had Randall at the last meeting talking about sustainability, and then Larissa here because they're sort of on a different schedule, a tighter schedule. We're trying to get them kind of through their contract, so we wanted to bring them to you early. And now we're going to circle back to existing conditions, and actually we submitted a pretty lengthy existing conditions report to the city, and we want to, have a discussion on that. I think a lot of that information you will know because you live here, but there's a lot of things I think we can pull out and trends and things that have changed since your last plan. And so that will be the discussion. There will be some homework either coming before that meeting or very shortly after of this report to read and get us your feedback, your local knowledge, experience, what you think's missing, what you think we got right, what might be wrong, what needs work. So that is to come, and we look forward to seeing you in a month.
Great, thank you. Thanks.